Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's Reimagining Performance Management webinar. We will be starting in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining today's Reimagining Performance Management webinar. A number of people are still trying to log in, so we will be starting shortly. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining today's webinar. The attendees are joining fast and furious, so we're just going to give them a few more seconds to get on so that they don't miss the beginning minutes of this webinar. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Reimagining Performance Management webinar. This is part of AKT's Insight series, where AKT has been an SAP partner for over a decade. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle and the facilitator to today's webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode. On your panel, you are able to ask questions through the text box. If your computer audio drops during this webinar, you can switch to the phone audio options that were provided in your confirmation email. So before I pass the webinar to our presenters today, let me first introduce AKT to those who are first-time participants. AKT is one of the largest SAP Cloud People Solutions firms in the EMEA region, with more than 140 consultants in local businesses across 6 countries, including France, the UK, Czech Republic, Switzerland, and other countries. We are a full service provider of SAP solutions, and globally, we have run over 350 SuccessFactors projects. We offer our customers a broad range of HR advisory and consultancy and support services, from cloud implementations to change management and end user communications and training. We also have a dedicated global team offering the latest apps development and specializing on post-go-live support and optimization of customer systems. We are also a global partner offering experience management advisory and consulting and support utilizing SAP Qualtrics technology. So on to today's webinar. Our presenters today are Eytan Bernstein, Managing Partner of AKT's People Advisory Business, and Shirley Rosenberg, SuccessFactors Performance and Goals Management Team Leader. So, moving on to today's webinar, I'll pass it to our first panelist, Eytan Bernstein. Over to you, Eytan. Eytan, I think you're on mute.
I am not on mute anymore.
You are not on mute anymore. We can most certainly hear you now. Thanks, Eytan.
Wonderful. So I think many of you are probably here because you've been reading and seeing some of these titles coming up over the last few years, basically explaining that it's time to end performance management, that performance management sucks, that performance reviews are pointless and insulting, so why do they still exist? Or that we should be rethinking performance management in general, and particularly in light of the post-COVID pandemic situation. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And so really a lot of organizations feel that there's something wrong. Most of the recent research shows that when organizations are asked, is performance management actually achieving its primary objectives? Or is it really keeping pace with the business? Or is it really having a positive effect on performance? Most organizations around the world of different sizes and different industries feel that there's a big issue with on a recent Gartner survey presented here, 82% of companies reporting their performance management processes are not effective in achieving its primary objective, whether it be driving individual performance, organizational performance, growth and learning, and other things organizations have set forth. And McKinsey here on your right has done a research recently to what degree do companies feel that the performance management processes have an absolute positive effect on individuals' performance? Isn't that the reason we're doing this? And many organizations, 54% of organizations feel that there isn't, or it's very neutral. So the question is, why are we doing this? We actually asked you, the participants of this webinar, in preparation. Many of you received a survey and many responded. So one of the questions we asked is, you feel that your organization performance management processes drive significant business value? And about half of you feel that they do and half that they don't. I assume that's why you're here. And we also asked, is your current processes an effective use of employee and manager time? And again, just over half of you feel that it is, and just under half that it doesn't. These are actually better results than most surveys. I challenge you to consider whether you were a little optimistic about this. But if this is true because you have attention on it, because you're already running advanced software solutions and have redesigned your processes over the last few years, that's great. There's a good reason why there's a lot of criticism toward the current performance management processes in many organizations. And really briefly, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, the idea that performance management happens in December or January because that's when it's good from a timing perspective for HR to close the year, has very little correlation to the real life activities of when people are finishing projects, moving between jobs, have time to go through a process. The frequency of once or twice a year of getting feedback is obviously not aligned at all with expectations these days. The practices of forced distribution that have become very common in many organizations are not necessarily really supporting driving best performance, and not necessarily creating a positive, growth-oriented atmosphere for people. The fact that performance management in many organizations is very focused on looking backward on how you performed over the last 6 months or the last year is achieving the opposite of a forward-looking, development-oriented approach. Most organizations still have the direct manager being the single or the primary assessor of individuals. And we already know that in many organizations, that's not how the organization runs anymore. Manager may be on the other side of the world. They may be not the primary person seeing the individual's performance. That in an agile organization or a global organization, you may be working with many, many different constituents and stakeholders. And your manager is actually not the person who knows how to provide feedback and necessarily know what we're doing. And we know that organizations spend an incredible amount of time on calibrating performance, and not necessarily is that time really effective in making the performance reviews more precise or creating real value. And as a result of that, it's not surprising that most organizations in the world are rethinking their performance management. So the same recent study I mentioned earlier by Gartner last year found that 81% of organizations are making changes in their performance management process. That's amazing. That's 4 out of 5 organizations. And that's because there's a feeling that something needs to change. And organizations are experimenting with different solutions, but not yet has there been clarity on what's really working well, what's really impacting performance. So organizations have been struggling over the last few years to make changes. When asked, what are you trying to do in those changes? We're seeing that many organizations are trying to first make the processes simple. They're not easy and they're not simple for individuals. They're at least trying to make them least time consuming, which is a good thing. If it's not creating a lot of value, let's at least not consume a lot of manager and employee time. But there are other things which we'll talk about in this session that organizations are trying to do in their new design of performance management. Now, a lot of organizations, and particularly when you read the popular press, are saying, let's just throw out performance management. And we take the position of one of our global partners in Aon, which is let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater, and that there is value in doing performance management, but it has to be executed well. And maybe as a great article by Harvard Business Review, which is 5 years old but still very relevant, compares this to Winston Churchill's statement about democracy, that it's not a perfect system, but it's better than others that have been tried. So performance evaluations have its challenges and problems, but they're better than not doing things. But the question is how you design them. So that takes us back to going back to the real basics of what our organizations are trying to do and what's the core objective of these processes. And let's go back to that before redesigning, asking, do we remember why we're doing this? And there are 5 basic objectives that most organizations are looking at, which are still very true and very relevant. And we should challenge you to look at how you're doing on that. So the first is ensuring that every person that comes to work every day is working on the right things and working toward the right results. And as things change rapidly, and we've seen during the COVID era in the last 6 months, how priorities have changed so rapidly, and it's so hard to keep up. How quickly are you able to realign every person coming to work to be working on the right things and toward the right results? That's very, very challenging. And when we ask a lot of organizations, is that happening? The answer is not always. The second thing organizations are trying to do is make sure that each person is working professionally and efficiently and effectively, and that they're constantly improving in the way they're performing on the things they're working on. So if the first item is what they're working on, the second item is how they're working on those things. And are we continuously ensuring that every person is doing things better and better in the way they're delivering their specific roles and responsibilities? The third thing many organizations still want to achieve is being able to consistently identify both outstanding performers as well as low performers, as well as other key populations, people with unique skills and capabilities, people with high level of potential to grow into other types of roles or leadership positions. An organization is still looking to the performance processes to enable that identification and differentiation of the individuals in the organization. A fourth thing organizations are still looking to achieve is to differentiate the use of compensation, recognition, and other types of rewards and invest in the right people. Given that everyone has limited resources these days, are we really putting our resources on the individuals that contribute the most? Are we recognizing the right people? Are we investing in the right people? Which of course ties to the ability to identify the outstanding performers and the high potential people. And the fifth is, are we really giving the people the right development and growth opportunities, both based on the gaps that they have for performing their current roles, as well as looking into what their future development is and what their personal development objectives are. And those 5 objectives are still hold true in organizations. And as you look at your performance management process, you should be asking, which of these are we achieving well? And which of them do we have gaps in as we design our processes? We actually asked you these questions in the pre-webinar survey, and the answers we got are surprisingly good. So 73% of those who answered the survey feel that there is a high degree of people knowing what to work on and working on the right things. And exactly 2/3 of you reported on each of the other 4 items that is actually done well. I think that's outstanding results. Again, I would ask those questions within your organization. Those are much better results than we see in other surveys or in other populations. And it just may be that the population on this webinar are moving along faster and asking questions better than others. And then I would challenge the 1/3 of you who responded negatively about any of these to reconsider how to design your processes in alignment to those objectives. Okay, so that's what some of the problems, but how are organizations going about redesigning their processes? So there are a few principles that organizations have started to adopt as they're thinking about redesigning their processes. Some of those relate to looking at the digital world, the digital era, not just from a technology perspective, but actually from a cultural, behavioral, speed perspective, and ask, are we changing our processes so that they are better adept for the digital era? And that means, one, much more frequent, much more open, and much more collaborative and peer-related feedback. We see from different surveys, particularly when we look at Gen Y and as Gen Z enter the workforce, that the expectation for immediate micro feedback, less formal, less written, is much more important and is even much more motivating. A small survey done in 2019 by Joblist shows that the most motivating way of giving feedback was regular informal meetings. So that's the expectation from a generation growing up into social media and immediate feedback. And that's the expectation people have in the workplace. We also see an expectation growing for much more candor and much more transparency. A recent book by a senior Facebook executive talks all about that, an expectation that things be much more open, that people be treated much more as adults and not a parental position toward employees, but a much more eye-to-eye, adult-to-adult relationship. And we see that in general, people are used to consuming social media, are used to believing that peers have a good picture of the reality, often better than one individual manager. And so we see more and more use of peer reviews, which is basically taken from processes we see outside of work, right? Not one person writing a recommendation for a restaurant, but going into social media and see what others see. Not reading a book with recommendations on site, but going on TripAdvisory and getting the recommendations from the masses. Okay? So those things are filtrating into the workplace and into the performance management processes. The second thing that's really taking place in all redesign is thinking about where technology plays a role. And technology plays a role both as an enabler of the new ways of working, but also as something driving innovation. So we see that as new technologies enable doing new things, that's driving the behavior of users and the expectations, and then they're implemented and improving the way we're doing things. So obviously, doing continuous performance management on old systems where you need to be in front of a computer, where you're not always connected, where there's a difficult user interface, that's very challenging. But as processes become more cloud-based and mobile and available everywhere and can support multi-channel solutions with a great user experience, obviously it's easier to look at how that can be driving new ways of managing performance, simpler ways of documenting activities happening throughout the year, a more multi-channel way of communication. And the third thing that we're seeing that organizations are adopting as they're experimenting with new ways of doing performance management is really looking at how things need to be much more focused, simple, and segmented. Let me say a word or two about that. So one of the issues we see most of our organizations struggling with is trying to achieve too much with their performance management. And I love Dilbert, so here's a quick Dilbert says your user requirements include 400 features. Do you realize that no human would be able to use a product with that level of complexity? Good point. I better add ease of use to the list. And so when we go and ask customers, what are you trying to achieve? They often give us a long list of all these types of things. We want to differentiate, we warn, and we want to identify development goals, and we want to engage employees, and we want to provide sound data for talent decisions, and we want to limit legal risks and exposure, and we want to develop our employees, and many other things. And what would you expect? How do you expect the process to be simple and easy if you're trying to design for so many different objectives? And so without getting into all the details here, one of the things we're seeing is more and more organizations trying to much simplify their processes, among other things, by thinking through a user design approach. Think about your end users, what employees and managers need, not trying to achieve many objectives, really simplify forms and other things to keep the process much simpler and much more effective. And the third thing we're seeing organizations doing is using segmented approaches. So in other areas of HR, it's very natural that we do segmentation. Obviously, salespeople don't have the same compensation as manufacturing employees, as executives. In learning, it's clear to us we don't provide the same training to different jobs and different levels in the organization. In talent programs, we don't provide the same assessment solutions, the same development programs to different populations. Why do we consider performance management needs to be the same for every population, from the most junior employee in a blue-collar job to the most senior executive? We shouldn't. We should be looking at segmentation. And some organizations have said, we don't have one size fits all for everyone. We actually should have a segmented approach to different populations. So there's a lot of experimentation going on, but in all that, we're seeing these types of principles as key to success in those organizations. You might ask, because I can't see the questions you're asked, how is COVID in the last 6 months of the pandemic affecting these processes? Which is a good question. So here's a couple answers. So I think the general answer is that COVID is really accelerating the adoption and the rethinking about performance management. Like in other areas of HR, the trend was already there, and COVID is actually challenging us to move things forward much faster. That's one of the things we're seeing in performance management. So obviously, when people are farther away and not face-to-face and not meeting in the hallways, obviously when priorities for organizations are changing very rapidly and the volatility of the business is consistently going up and down, it becomes even more critical than in regular days for more frequent, smaller evaluations, realignment of expectations and goals. Okay, so that's driving that. And as this Harvard Business Review article that just came out recently suggests, that this is a crisis could actually be a catalyst for changing organizational performance culture from a very stable once a year goal setting, once a year or twice a year feedback, to a much more continuous process, which fits the environment we're in right now and it requires. The other trend we're seeing within the COVID environment is what people are being evaluated for. So suddenly the kinds of behaviors and competencies of this world become even more important to be what we assess. So you may be assessing some of the key competencies of your organization for many years. You may be asking questions around achieving goals and around certain behaviors you expect, but this is where a lot of organizations are stopping and asking questions about who is showing agility and nimbleness. Which of our employees are able to do that? Who is able to demonstrate intense focus and prioritization, right? Who isn't able to forge relationships and with customers and with peers, even despite the fact that we're working at a distance, working and virtually, and it's harder. Okay, so asking new questions about what impacts performance at this time and giving emphasis on those things. I highly recommend, there's an article by a peer of mine and a good friend, Dr. Seymour Adler, which can be found on the internet. And if any of you would like it, we can also send you the link, which talks about this. And if those trends are going on, let's talk about a few examples about how organizations have actually implemented a new way of looking about performance management. So one of the most recognized, probably one of the first organizations to really drive a significant change in performance management is Adobe, who went through this process probably 5 or 6 years ago. What's interesting with Adobe, I'm sure many of you on this call know of Adobe, use Adobe tools. Adobe is a software company, but they're so proud of the work that they've done in their performance management, what they call the Adobe Check-in, that they've made the Adobe Check-in available on their website. You can go to Adobe Check to the link that you see here, and they actually share movies, case studies, and the actual tools that they use in performance management. And we highly recommend it. I think Adobe is a great example of an organization that's moved to continuous performance with a regular ongoing cadence, much less documentation, ongoing feedback and dialogue, no formal written review, and has done it consistently over time and continues to feel that it is an effective process for them. So I think it's a great case study to go in and read, and there's a lot of interesting material that they've made available because they're so proud of the work they've done. If I say a word about the Adobe approach, which I do think is a best practice to be learned from, I think it has some very simple and elegant principles around continuous performance management. They basically said what we really want to encourage is a check-in between employees and their managers. Those check-ins can be initiated by managers and they can be initiated by employees at any time. We recommend a certain cadence. We don't police it. And we do want to make sure that it happens. And we encourage either side, both employees and managers, to initiate those in order to create clarity and feedback and development. Now, they've defined 3 types of check-ins. Check-ins that aim at setting expectations, check-ins that aim at providing feedback on performance, and check-ins that aim at looking at future development. And any one of the 3, any one of the participants, manager or employee, can initiate a check-in and say, I need more to have a check-in about expectations. I feel the goals have changed, the environment has changed. Can we please have a check-in on expectations? Or I want to have a check-in around development. It's time to think about the next steps and how I develop. So either side can initiate this. And obviously through the life cycle of an employee, you would expect that as I enter a new position, I would have more check-ins around setting expectations. Maybe as I'm starting to deliver and work, more check-ins around feedback. And as I'm maxing out on my performance from a certain position, more check-ins around development. But that's up to either side to initiate them and do it. I think one last thing to mention, and I really encourage you to read about the Adobe, that's nice about them is that they recognize that in many organizations, people, when you ask managers whether they provide ongoing feedback to employees, then many managers say, yeah, I do all the time. And when you ask the employees, does your manager provide ongoing feedback to you? And they say, no, they never do. And part of what Adobe have recognized is saying it's enough to say we're doing a check-in. It doesn't necessarily need to be an hour in the calendar. It doesn't necessarily need to be a formal sit down that takes a long time. But by announcing this is a check-in, we're now doing a feedback-oriented check-in, or we're now doing an expectations-oriented check-in, it makes sure that both sides, both the manager and employee, are aware of the fact that we're now doing that. And there is less misunderstanding that there was feedback or there was expectation setting as a result. So a really good case study to learn from. Another organization I wanted to share is Nestle. We think about continuous performance management as something that mostly advanced technology companies like Adobe, like SAP, like IBM have implemented. There are actually many manufacturing organizations, large global organizations that are also moving forward with implementing new performance management and ongoing check-ins. And here's a little bit of information around Nestle's redesign. Again, really thinking about how to simplify the process, how to make it much more oriented to coaching and dialogue and not a manager telling an employee how their performance was. And really looking at making it much, much simple, much less formal, much more open, much more dialogue, much more focused on real-time feedback and future development in a very similar way, and using some of the same types of approaches that I presented from Adobe. So those just two examples, and there's plenty of material on them and other cases like IBM's design that they've been rolling out for the last few years. I'll skip it. In any of the cases of the new performance that we're seeing, there are a few things that repeat themselves over and over again. So most organizations still have an annual or semi-annual process. And what organizations are doing with that annual or semi-annual process is trying to very much simplify them, reducing the size of the forms and the complexity, reducing the structure, making it much easier to just have a dialogue and not feed the beast of the system, but really encourage a quality discussion, and much more focused on the few things that are most important in order to generate performance and to generate growth. And on the other side, we're seeing more and more organizations implement continuous performance in one way or another, ensuring that there's much more continuous and immediate feedback, less formal, really making sure that those dialogues are happening on an ongoing basis, but also ensuring that those processes are getting tied much stronger into other HR processes, and that the performance management is not disconnected and standalone, but actually is connected to compensation, connected to learning, connected to development, connected to internal mobility opportunities, and other such things. We asked you about those. Before that. And if you ask where are we and where should we be, so we actually see most organizations are moving from only having a discrete once a year or twice a year performance management process to some form of hybrid solution where they still maintain the once a year or twice a year review, but integrate some type of continuous performance management which feeds those annual or semi-annual events. We do see a few examples like Adobe that are completely getting rid of the annual or semi-annual, but that's still only a few, and most organizations in the hybrid, so Shirley, who's going to come after me in a second, will actually be showing how those hybrid implementations are being performed. Just the last to share some feedback you gave, we asked you in the pre-webinar survey, how are you conducting your survey, your performance management? And still, most of the organizations on this call are doing their performance management once a year or twice a year, together over 80%. Some already moved to quarterly, and only 10% of you have moved to a continuous or once a month. So still in the same trend that we're seeing with many of our clients around the world. And we also asked of how well your performance management is integrated into other organizational processes. So many of you already have some level of integration, with most of you are integrated into compensation, but still ways to go into connecting performance into career development, into learning, into succession, and other areas for you guys to think about where the best practice organizations are looking. To just wrap things up before moving over to Shirley, I do want to share one thought and another article worth looking at. As we're going into this really challenging era, and a lot of change, a lot of things going on. One of the things that's also changing in performance management processes is whether they're driving a performance obsessed culture or a growth culture. One of the implications of that, for example, is the use of force distribution that more and more organizations are leaving in the last few years. And that's because many of the practices that have been acceptable and used in the last few years have really given the fear of creating a zero-sum game where some people are winning and some people are losing. While the more advanced organizations realize that the objective is really to drive everybody up, to try to help everyone improve, that if every person in the organization is continuously doing things better and learning and growing, the organization collectively will be doing the same. So how do we make performance something that's about a growth culture and a learning culture and not about a scoring kind of approach that creates winners and losers is one of the challenges that many organizations are thinking about and impact some of the decisions you'll be making. So I thought for you, as I transfer over to Shirley, to talk about how some of these ideas and trends can be implemented in SuccessFactors.
Clayton, I'm going to now pass the presentation to Shirley. Thanks to everyone who have been submitting questions. We'll address those at the end of this presentation. Also, some of the links that Eitan was mentioning in his presentation have been provided to you in your chat channel. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So I'm happy to be with you today. And we'll now discuss on how the continuous performance can be realized in SuccessFactors. So I will focus, as Eitan said before, on the hybrid model that reflects the direction most of our customers are shifting to. And this model combines the traditional process of having a yearly formal cross-organization review with short cycles of continuous performance. And when looking on timelines perspective, we see that organizations conduct the traditional process of goal setting, mid-year review, and annual process review in fixed times during the year. And actually, this is the skeleton of the continuous performance. This is where the continuous performance is based on. The CPM is a complementary approach to the traditional one when we're looking to into the hybrid model. So while the traditional model or process, in this process, employees and manager discuss on goals and performance about twice or once a year, the hybrid approach creates a more frequent sessions along the year, in addition to those formal meetings, performance review meetings. So the hybrid model enables a simple data flow between employees' day-to-day activities and the professional or development goal plans, as you can see in point 1 and 2. So because the continuous performance management is integrated with goal management, so actually employees' activities are always remain aligned with employees' objectives. And moreover, we can see that managers can use achievements to recognize employees success frequently, easily during the year. So that shouldn't be like a very big process for recognizing. Here you can do it very easily. And the achievement that was created by the employee or the manager will be connected to the relevant goal and be available in the goal plan. In addition, this achievement will also be seen in the performance form during the year-end process. So in that way, employees and manager can get a full picture of all employees' achievements during the year-end process and along the entire year. Here we are moving to the system, and we can see here the new UI of the CPM. It was updated in the last release a few months ago. And you can see here that as a manager, one can see his own continuous performance management page or activities, and also switch into direct reports CPMs. And you can also see from this screen that we see employees' activities arranged by gold, by statuses. We can create new activities, achievements, or start a meeting. When creating an activity, we can connect activity to goals. This is where we see the data flow. It can be a business goal or a development goal. And we also can create a totally new goal that will be automatically added to the goal plan. So in that way, we keep employees' goal plan up to date based on actual projects or actual activities is doing here. And it's very relevant today. And not only today, we have the COVID-19, but in general, in last years, we see a lot of changes in our projects during the year, and goals that we set at the beginning of the year are not always relevant later on during the year. So this is a way to easily update our goals and our activities throughout the year. So when I create a new goal, I will get the option to fill in all fields as in a goal plan. So if your employees used to add goals, set goals at the beginning of the year throughout the goal module or the performance form, here it will look the same field, same way. So actually the work with the CPM provides a dynamic and easy way of updating employees' goal according to changes in employees' focus throughout the year. And as I said, this goal will be added automatically to employees' goal plan. It could be a professional or a development goal plan. While creating an activity, you need, or you are asked to associate a status. So when the status of an activity changes to complete, you get the option to directly create an achievement for this completed activity. So it's very easy. It's a flow of the activities and the goals. The achievements one may or may not have accomplished can be related to activities and can be not related to activities. So I will explain it, because just before we show that I'm creating an activity, completed the activity, and transforming it to achievement. But I can also create an achievement without connecting to an activity. For example, you may volunteer to do something as part of a corporate initiative, or you might have stepped in at the last minute to close a sales deal. So such participation may not be noted as an activity or be related directly to some of your goals or employees' goals, but it certainly can count as an achievement. So it can be added in the system. And all achievements accomplished during the year will always be seen here in the continuous performance module, and they will provide managers and employees an easy, friendly view of the achievements accomplished throughout the year. Now, I want to show you how we see the corresponding or the data flow between the continuous performance and the goals. So here we can see the first goal, which could have been created in the continuous performance module. And we see here also the achievements as was connected to that goal. We see here we have 2 achievements that were connected to that goal. And also in the goal section of a performance form, we will see the same achievement. The employee or the manager can see the achievement. So that actually simplifies managers' preparation toward the evaluation, and it helps avoiding the BAS of last few months that happens a lot of times. So you accumulate during the years the activities we have accomplished, the achievements, and we can see them all in the goal plans and in the performance review form. So this was a short demonstration of how the continuous performance module provides the solution many organizations are looking for when searching for a complementary continuous process and tool to the traditional review process. So to implement this hybrid approach. Michelle?
Great. Thank you very much, Shirley. I will now have some questions for the presenters. Thanks very much, everyone, for sending their questions in. The first question, Eitan, if you are, let's just make sure you're not on mute. Yes, great, you're there. The first question, Eitan, how do we make decisions about reward without grades?
Great question. So organizations are experimenting with different ways of approaches and different levels of trust of managers. Some of the more advanced organizations are saying, you know, given a fixed budget and given if I have a clear structure of what high performers should be getting, what a medium performer should be getting, what a low performer should be getting, I can trust my managers to distribute a given budget based on their overall ongoing understanding of individuals' performance. That requires a lot of trust, so it's a lot of easier when there is sort of a review. But actually, some research has shown that that's the real indication of review. What do I mean by that? In the past, sometimes we used to see in organizations that were performance management, and then managers were using discretion to do things around the way they distributed money, and that actually the way they distributed money in some organizations was actually a better indicator of how important it was for the managers to keep individuals to drive their performance than the performance review necessarily was. So there are organizations that are saying without performance reviews, given a clear guideline of what high performance looks like over the year and how we want to compensate high performers versus medium performers versus low performers, we trust our managers. Given, I just want one more word, given what I said about most organizations, despite the fact that there are great titles in the newspapers, have not completely left having some kind of grading system. Some of them have put it behind the scenes. Some of them are doing it less frequently. Some of them are doing it only for the top performers and the lowest performers and not across the board. But most organizations in some level of a hybrid model still have some form of rating and therefore still review that there's some kind of correlation between the performance rating and the compensation. So it's not that common. It's only very few % of organizations have completely abandoned having some form of rating, and therefore most of them still have something to tie to performance. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Eitan. Another question coming in relating. We really rely on annual ratings and calibration to pay bonus. This is our biggest challenge. How can we shift this to enable more continuous improvement?
So one of the trends we're seeing is, and again, this is changes that are very hard for many HR organizations, is just like performance is becoming continuous. We're starting to see organizations that realize that recognition, reward, compensation, development are all continuous processes as well. Of course, that requires a whole new thinking of how you budget compensation and how you use it throughout the year. But just like feedback is not something people are willing to wait for a year, the current generation is also not willing to wait for spot bonus, for recognition, for maintaining alignment to the market. You know, as I grow and I develop and I take more responsibilities, why do I need to wait for April? Because that's when the organization gives its merit budget. So we see some of the organizations that are becoming much more agile in their performance approach, or some of them are also becoming more agile and more flexible in how they use some of their compensation aspects throughout the year. Obviously, with some types of compensation elements, where there's an annual goal plan, and that is reviewed once actual results of revenue and EBITDA and other such are published. You can't do that. So it's not a black and white approach. It's a mix of tools that you give managers throughout the year to compensate and reward, not just monetary reward, and with the annual cycles of HR. And those mixes are gradually changing, just like the performance mixes are gradually changing.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come in, is it possible to add achievements independently without linking to activities in the new CPM?
Yeah, so the question is yes. You can also in all the UI, you can create an achievement without connecting to an activity. You need to know that if you create an activity and connect it to a goal, then the achievements of this activity will be seen in the goal plan and also in the performance form. However, if you create an achievement that is not connected to an activity or a goal plan, it will not see there later in the goal plan or in the performance form.
Thank you. And how do you provide feedback in the tool? How do you embed those feedback in the performance management form?
Okay, so I share with you the new UI, which in this release has not have the feedback option. So you couldn't see it, but approximately in the next release, which is going to happen soon, there will be an option to add feedbacks. However, in the old UI, which is the UI most organizations who implemented the CPM uses, you have the option to ask for feedback on an activity or ask feedback for an achievement or a general feedback. And again, if you have asked a feedback for an activity or achievement that are connected to a goal, you will later see this feedback in the performance form and also in the goal plan.
Thank you. A couple more questions. Calibration of ratings is one of our most time-consuming and least value-adding processes. How can continuous improvement, as you have designed it, help with the process and still enable performance ratings to be given?
So there's an aspect of this which I hope that is okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, there's an aspect to that question which maybe Shirley can relate to, of how some of the visual tools can simplify some of the calibration work. I think what many organizations are realizing is that a lot of the calibration work is creating very little value for a lot of effort. I recently, a consultant I work with shared with me that they did some research in a very, very large, well-known pharmaceutical organization that I'm not in liberty to say which, where they reviewed the performance reviews before going into calibration sessions and the performance reviews after coming out of the calibration sessions, and the thousands and thousands of manager hours that were spent in the calibration sessions. And they found that after tens of thousands of, this is a very large global organization, tens of thousands of manager hours across the globe were invested in calibration sessions, there were only changes to the reviews of less than 2% of the individuals. And you ask yourself, for all this effort, are we really creating valuable, real value in the organization? So part of it is really asking, do we need all this calibration, at all? And do we need to do it across units and jobs like many organizations do today? There are also tools, and maybe I'll let Shirley relate to that simplify the ability to take your ongoing performance and the specific feedback from the current cycle and visually ease the process of reviewing those across parameters for different groups of managers to ensure that there's some level of calibration without long sessions and discussions.
Right. So in the success factors, you have different tools. It really depends on the exact need and the relevant solution that can be provided, but you have different reports where you can see the distribution and compare the guided distribution with the actual distribution. This is only a view only way, and you have all other tools in where you can change the rating without having a calibration session with all the management team and something very broad. But you can, or an HR, or a senior manager, or any other person can update the ratings. And also see in the last years organizations that have decided to not to have a calibration session and a big process, although they need the ratings to be according to some guidelines. And they have decided that a senior manager will look at a report, review the distribution in his organization, and if any change is needed, he will approach the relevant managers. So it's something that is much linear, and also in system terms, it's very easy to implement.
Great, thank you. How often do you find 360 Review is being used?
So it's part of, so 360s can be used in many different ways. They can be used as directly related to performance management and indirectly related to performance management. Most of the usage today of 360 is used as in most organizations is used as a developmental feedback tool, unrelated as part of leadership or other types of programs, and not related directly to performance management. When we look at 360, not in the sense of the classic 360, but of peer feedback and collecting input from more than just the direct manager, we're seeing more and more organizations utilize data collection and feedback collection from more and more individuals because of the nature of the way organizations are dispersed and individuals are working with different managers on different tasks. And maybe Shirley, you could say a word about requesting feedback from individuals. It's not as much as a classic 360 structured process where the process goes out with the same questions to a direct manager, peers, and a number of reports, but much more a collection of insights and specific feedback from key stakeholders that an individual works with. And that's becoming simplified and more automated so that it can be really utilized more broadly as part of the ongoing performance management, and definitely as part of an annual cycle. We're seeing more and more of that being used. Shirley, maybe you want to say a word about the ability to do that.
Right, yes. So in SuccessFactors, we obviously have a module for the 360 review, which most, as Eitan say, most organizations that implemented it use it for development and not as part of the performance review. However, I think that all of organizations, I would say 99%, just if I meet an organization that does not use it, all organizations use the functionality of ask feedback, which is a very easy way of asking feedback from others in the organization and outside the organization. Those feedbacks I later implemented inside the performance forum. The same way it works with the continuous performance. So the feedback request, when a manager asks or an employee asks to get feedback on an achievement or an activity or a general feedback from the continuous performance, it's sending a mail. The reply is very simple. So this is what most organizations uses today, a very easy way, a simple way of asking and replying or providing a feedback. And 360, as you know, as a formal process, is not much in use for performance evaluation.
Great, thank you. Shirley, you did mention the new UI. A question came in if the UI is going to be changed automatically in the upcoming release.
No, so the answer is no. This new UI is still on work. It's not final yet. As I said, we don't have the feedback there yet. So it's not going to be replaced automatically. It will take time until it will be done. And we will update you in our webinars that we have after every release. We'll update you when it will be the end of life for the old UI. We will get you updated.
Yes, most certainly. As Shirley mentioned, we run comprehensive webinars on the biannual SuccessFactors releases. This will happen at the end of November. So everyone on this call will receive an invitation to that free informational webinar. A couple of last questions before the turn of the hour. The question has come in, how do you suggest focusing on development and growth instead of achievements and performance?
That's a great, very important question. I think there's a whole way of approaching forward-looking feedback and forward-looking forms that is very different than looking at backward-looking feedback and backward-looking forms. So it starts with some simple things about how the questions are asked and what dialogue we expect managers and employees to have in the feedback session. So how much is this about describing things that happened in the past versus how much of it is about coaching on what you should be doing in the future? And it sounds very simple, but in many organizations it isn't. Many organizations, the forms and the requests and the discussion that happens in the performance review are about what results did you achieve this year? What were your key contributions? What did you not perform well enough? Okay, and then by definition, it's a discussion about in September you did this, in August you did that, this you could have done better. Okay, and that is not valuable enough. It's important, but it's not valuable enough in a forward-oriented session. The forward-oriented session has to relate to things that happened in the past. So you can't ignore the past, but focuses on what you can do better next year versus what you did this year. So it relates to the performance in the past, but it's much more around a coaching forward, growth-oriented. So you manage the project this year and you have a similar one next year. What do we expect to happen differently in the next time we do it? Here's things you did really, really well this year. How do you reuse those and build on your strengths next year? Those can both be implemented in the questions and in the format of the forms and the technical process itself, but mostly in the end come down to the skills and the capabilities of the managers to have a dialogue and do coaching to the employees around a forward or growth-oriented approach.
Thank you, Eitan. Okay, with that, thanks to Eitan and Shirley for taking time today to present. We did have additional questions which we were unable to answer as our time has ended, but we will address those via email responses to you shortly. We will also follow up this webinar with a recording as well as a survey to hear your views. So with that, we hope you have a good rest of the day and a great week. Stay healthy, everyone, and thank you very much. Goodbye.